Hello and welcome. This is Building the Premier Accounting Firm. I'm your host, Roger Knecht, and each and every week we have on the show an expert, a guest on to help us actually work on our business so that we can confidently offer quality accounting, bookkeeping, and tax services, and today's going to be no exception. I'm excited to have on the show Meryl Johnston. She happens to be the founder of Bean Ninjas. She started this back in 2015 with $1,000 following the 7-day startup methodology. Now, 8 years later, the company operates in Australia, the US, UK, and has distributed teams of 30 people. Now, after 6 years as CEO, Meryl stepped into a part-time advisor role with Bean Ninjas and has a leadership team running the day-to-day operations. She's now actually focused on her podcast, The Lifestyle Accountant Show, and in investing in business in the accounting industry. So that's something that we're going to be talking about here today. Now, on weekends, she actually spends her time surfing at a local Gold Coast beach or hanging out with her partner and 2 daughters. So Meryl, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Roger. Great to be here.
This is going to be a lot of fun. So obviously you're joining us from Australia, so it's bright and early in the morning there. Here it's the end of the day, so we've got 2 different perspectives going on. One of the things I wanted to start with, and I usually do this with my guests, is just give us a little bit of a background on how you got into the accounting profession. What drew you to become an accountant?
So I actually come from a long line of accountants. My mother was a chartered accountant in Australia back when there weren't many female chartered accountants. And my grandmother also studied commerce, and I have an aunt that's in accounting. But I actually didn't. So I have the females in my family are accountants, but I actually didn't think that I was going to be an accountant. I'm really interested in business. And as a teenager, I was always thinking about different ways to make money. And so the reason I decided to study accounting was because I thought it was a great pathway to learn about business, to get exposure to lots of different businesses, and then ultimately start my own.
Well, definitely a path that many of the people I speak with are familiar with. It's not exactly the profession of choice for some, but it is something that we get into and we enjoy and like. So you got into accounting, obviously, let's call it the family profession. You start doing it. What led you to start Bean Ninjas?
Well, my goal was always to start a business, but it took me quite a while to do that. So to come back around to it. So when I was studying my accounting degree, I actually started my first business, which was a tennis coaching business at university. But I stopped that when I got a graduate position at BDO.
Okay.
And so I worked at BDO for a number of years, studied to become a chartered accountant, and then worked at a number of other accounting firms and also in commercial roles, and realized, what do I want out of life? And I wanted to travel. I wanted freedom. There was lots of things I wanted to do outside of my career. And so that was the main driver for me to start Bean Ninjas, was actually to run a business where I could work from anywhere.
Yeah.
And I started Bean Ninjas about the time that Xero came out.
Okay. Yeah.
Xero comes from the Australian, New Zealand region. And that was, many, many listeners are probably familiar with it, but it's a cloud accounting tool where you could work for clients from anywhere. And so learning about that really opened my eyes up to thinking, well, I could do this kind of work from anywhere.
So when you started the business, obviously you were coming out of BDO. Why leave BDO and start your own business? That's obviously a risk. You're starting something. It's that entrepreneurial drive. Was there anything else that was going on at that time in your life that caused you to make that change?
So it was actually, I left BDO after 3 years and took 12 months leave without pay to go traveling around the world. And then after I actually moved cities. So I never went back to Melbourne and never went back to that role at BDO. And then I worked at a number of other places. And actually there was a step in between I didn't mention. So I used to work in the finance team for a group that operated airports in Australia.
Oh.
But I was back. I felt like I was working similar hours to what I used to do in audit. I was sometimes there on the weekend. It was late nights. So I actually started a consulting business before I started Bean Ninjas. So I didn't mention that. So for about 9 months, I was running a consulting business doing accounting software implementations. Sometimes it would be helping a business migrate payroll software or outsource it to something like ADP. And then sometimes it was doing things with Xero. And it was all project-based. And it was quite hard to scale that business. So I reassessed after 9 months and thought about, the criteria of my ideal business. And so instead of project-based, I wanted something with recurring revenue where I wasn't starting from zero every month. I knew what the revenue was going to be. I wanted repeatable processes that I could delegate to a team. I didn't want my name in the brand, which was my consulting business was basically my name. So that's where the name B Ninjas, that was one of the reasons we picked a name like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to run a business that could be international. And that's why we picked bookkeeping, because it's something that has to be done every month. It's very process-based, and it's easier to scale internationally than something like tax.
I love it. You're checking off so many great boxes. This is wonderful. Now, you obviously start the business. You've got this entrepreneurial feeling in your blood. You've gone from tennis to the consulting to this. How quick were you able to start and build the business? I know you speak of getting your first client within 7 days. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we read a book called The 7-Day Startup by Dan Norris. And so it's a little bit like Lean Startup, but for service businesses. And so he had a methodology where it was just pushing you to launch quickly. Many of us can be perfectionists. We could spend 2 months trying to build a website. And you really don't know anything about your customers or your clients when you're starting a new business, often. And so why spend all of that time? What's really important is to get those customers, talk to them, and start learning. And so my co-founder, Ben, lived in a different city. He flew up to the Gold Coast and we spent 7 days together coming up with, we created our own logo. We built a WordPress website. We didn't really know about bookkeeping. We were both accountants, but we hadn't ever worked in bookkeeping before. So we threw together three tiers of fixed fee pricing.
Nice.
And put it up on the website. And then we just went out and tried to get customers. And we found our first customer within 7 days. And we did that actually by posting in the 7-Day Startup Facebook group. Back then, Facebook groups were really popular. And so we were talking about what we were doing and working in public. And someone found that interesting. And back then, which is almost 8 years ago, fixed fee bookkeeping was really interesting and unusual back then.
Yeah. Now, you said at the beginning when you were starting the business, it was hard to, or it can be difficult to actually identify your customer and tailor a lot of your messaging around what they may be wanting or needing. But I do know eventually you did niche and you got into the e-commerce space. Tell us about how long it took for you to finally identify that was going to be your niche and what that transition might have taken.
It was quite a transition. I think our original tagline was bookkeeping for $99. We were competing on price. We quickly realized it was hard to deliver a quality service at that point. And then we changed, it was B Ninjas bookkeeping for online businesses, so which is still fairly broad. There's a lot of segments within businesses that operate online. And over time, we realized within that segment of online businesses that e-commerce customers were some of our best in terms of referring us work, being happy with the work we were doing, the profitability of they were more profitable than some of the other segments. So we realized that, and we gradually started creating more content, getting more active in the e-commerce communities. But it would have been only about the 5-year mark that we actually ripped the Band-Aid off and went all in on e-commerce and changed. Okay. If you go to our website now, you can see that we describe ourselves as e-commerce growth accountants. So right from when you hit the homepage of our website, everything's about e-commerce. Talking about, we work with Shopify and Amazon, and all of the language is tailored to business owners running e-commerce brands. But it took me a while to build up the courage to do that because we still had a portfolio of clients in different industries. So it was a slow transition to get there, but it's been incredible. Once we actually made that move, it really propelled the business forward.
You know, many people I speak with that eventually make that decision to niche or niche as they transition their companies do speak in hindsight of how beneficial it's been. It can be more profitable. It's a lot more rewarding. I think it's a lot more creative because you're able to specialize in the services you're providing. And it really causes you to become quite a bit of an expert. And that can be very rewarding just to have that type of feeling as to the relationship you're having with these clients as you take care of their particular needs. So I like what you're sharing. I know that after doing this for a number of years, you did in 2021 step down into more of a part-time role. I shared that in the bio that you'd provided us. The thing that's interesting to me is When business owners step away or transition out, there's a lot of components, a lot of moving parts that really contribute to this. Having in place standard operating procedures so you can properly delegate things and ensure that the work will get done correctly. Client relationships, how dependent upon you are the clients to where when you step away, do they still stay with the business? I mean, there's a lot of elements to this. Can you talk to what that decision was as to why you wanted to step into a part-time role and how that transition took place?
Sure. It was actually part of my original plan when starting Beanages was I wanted to build a business that could run without me. It just happened that it took me 6 years to get there. So I was always working towards that. And I had an organizational chart in the early days, and my name was in most of those boxes.
Yeah.
And gradually, one by one, I hired people and trained a team eventually so that my name was removed from all of those boxes and only now remains in the advisor box. I do also still do marketing strategy as well. That's more because I really enjoy it, and that doesn't take up a lot of time. So it was 6 years in the making to get to that point, and I was very intentional about gradually handing things off to other team members and also building a leadership team and empowering other people within the business to feel like they had autonomy and could make decisions and even do things that I didn't necessarily like. But if I was going to allow other people to run the business, then I needed to give them the ability to make decisions.
So with your clients, was there anything in particular you did with them to prepare them for your stepping aside in the business?
Quite a few years prior to that, I'd made the decision to not be client facing anymore. And so the first step was removing myself from the sales call process, because originally I used to take all of the sales calls. And you can imagine in the early days, we were in 3 different time zones. So I was getting up early to take the US calls, Australian during the day, UK in the evening. And so I was quite happy to hand that off. But that meant when I was doing those sales calls, often it was hard to detach myself from the relationship with the client because I was the first person they'd met
Yeah.
and they wanted to keep interacting with me. So removing myself from that process really helped because their first interaction on a call with Beanages was with someone else. And so someone else was managing those relationships. And then I made sure not to dive in. So even if there were issues, I had to, this took me it took me a number of years to get comfortable with this because my identity as a chartered accountant was tied up in doing excellent quality work, but we were bookkeeping. So clients weren't paying the price of a senior level chartered accountant. They were paying for bookkeeping. And so I had to separate my professional identity from that and allow team members to make mistakes and then go and fix them. And I don't mean we'd allow accounts to go out with major errors, but I mean more minor issues.
So there are 3 things that I typically speak of when we're talking about the firm and running the business, especially when it comes to stepping away. That transition is typically made up of the client relations, the team, the culture that you've got in the organization and how they're being managed, and lastly, the standard operating procedures, the workflow and the processes that are in place to ensure that the work's being done in a quality manner and ensuring that the clients are being taken care of. Is there anything more you'd want to add to any of those three items as you transitioned out and took on this last advisory role?
I'll add to a couple of those areas. So in building the leadership team, I decided that it made sense to incentivize different team members to run our different regions. And the best way to do that was for them to have some equity in the business. So I have business partners now that operate the US and UK and also did have that in Australia. And they all own equity in Beanages. And that was a big decision, but it really helped them have skin in the game, them to act like business owners.
Yeah.
And so while I don't own as much of the business, there was a period where after I bought my original co-founder out, I owned 100% of the business. So I own less, but I would prefer to have a smaller piece of a bigger pie and have team members and business partners now incentivized to act like owners.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think is worth thinking about. It's not going to be right in every situation, but it's something that's worth thinking about if you're trying to take a step back yourself as the business owner.
I love that. No, the fact that you were able to do that is amazing. And I actually understand it and have that conversation with many people as they transition out and provide that pathway for individuals to acquire equity. I'm curious, When you first hired those people, was equity something that was initially on the table that they were aware that they could work towards, or was this something that later came on the scene as you were now preparing to transition out and wanted them to step in a little bit more into that role?
Well, I'll talk about Tom in the UK and Wayne in the US, and they were two different situations. Tom was actually one of our very first hires, and he was introduced to us by a friend, and he just worked his way up through the business, and he lived in the UK. So it wasn't part of our original conversation, but year after year, he kept performing, kept rotating into different roles. And then eventually it became a conversation of, would you like to run the UK and Europe
Yeah.
part of Bean Ninjas? And so that took, I think it took about 4 or 5 years for that to happen. But it was quite different with Wayne in the US. He actually already owned his own bookkeeping practice. And so that was more of a merger. His business was much smaller, but he had his own book of fees and he was interested in joining Bean Ninjas. And he actually worked as a contractor while also running his business for a while so we could test things out. And eventually, again, it took a couple of years, but that was a conversation from the beginning that he was interested in becoming a partner and a business owner. And he was willing to put in the hard work to prove himself in the early days to make that happen.
Beautiful. No, those two stories are excellent examples. I appreciate them. So you mentioned earlier on, I want to go back to this, a little bit of your interest in marketing, that you were very involved in that. And I know that you have a variety of things that you felt have been proven to be effective. Do you have any tips regarding marketing, especially for a brand new accounting firm?
Well, I could go on all day. This is one of my favorite topics.
Good.
And it is funny, I didn't have any marketing training really. I mean, I'd studied a few subjects at university, but really prior to Bean Ninjas, I'd not spent much time on it. And so starting this business, which I really wanted to scale and I wanted to treat as a startup, I dived in and read lots of books and podcasts. But if I go back to my experience starting a business and what worked and what didn't, and what I see as the common mistakes, I think I think of long-term and short-term marketing strategies. And so at Bean Ninjas, we started writing a blog the day that we launched the business, but it took us 2 or 3 years to really see any benefit from that in terms of clients. It had other
Uh-huh.
benefits, but it took a long time for that to get going. And so I would put that in the long-term strategy basket. And in the short term basket, we were interacting in different Facebook groups and communities. And I was going to a lot of in person networking. And that building relationships with one on one or in small groups, that really helped to move the needle quickly and generate clients tomorrow or next week. So one mistake I see is trying to do these long term strategies, which are helpful, but not if you need a client tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I mean, I tried all sorts of things. I was cold calling. I tried newsletter drops in mailboxes, cold email, uh, building relationships with accounting firms for referrals. None of those things really worked. It was only when I started, for us when we started Bean Ninjas in that first year, where we got our clients was from in-person networking and from joining communities. We were in the online business space. That's where our clients were. And so going to conferences and building relationships and being really helpful and not asking for anything in return.
I like that. No, the idea of giving is very beneficial. The fact that you're sharing information and so forth can be an effective marketing strategy. I like that. The personable nature that you spoke of, I think we need to recognize in the accounting sphere that this is a client relation business, and we need to be willing to see them as persons and be willing to actually interact with them as such. So I'm liking how you're sharing all that. Are there any mistakes that you learned along the way as to what doesn't work in marketing?
Well, there's lots of things I couldn't get to work. I I never could get any kind of cold outreach to work. So cold email, cold telephone calls. Uh, I tried running Facebook ads once. So we had something we called a free zero audit, and it was a 100-point check, and we'd share a report and also have a call, and it was all for free. And we ran Facebook ads to it, and we got a bunch of people that registered, and then no one would give us access to their zero file to do the audit. And then I realized, okay, accounting is based on trust. So we need to focus on strategies where we build relationships and build trust first. And so that was an interesting lesson that Facebook ads didn't work then. But now, with a brand that's been around for 8 years, it's much easier for that to happen without an in-person interaction. So now we've got an established brand. We have leads that contact us from finding us on Google, but there's so much content that we've created. We've been on other podcasts, we've spoken at events. And so we've got a lot more credibility than what we had in the first couple of years of business.
Perfect. So what you're sharing here are obviously short-term effective ways of getting clients that are part of the marketing efforts. Long-term, the blogging, the podcasting, and so forth that you alluded to. I'm curious, do you have a favorite way of generating leads, a go-to, this is what you're really good at, and you find that it actually has a good ROI?
We've got two primary strategies now at B Ninjas where I would say 60 or probably 70% of our leads come from outside of word of mouth. So we definitely try and cultivate word of mouth and referrals by doing great work from existing clients. But I think all accountants are pretty good at that. So I'll put that to the side. The two main strategies that work for us are SEO these days. So we write a lot of content and it's all related to e-commerce accounting and things surrounding that. So it could be how to integrate a particular inventory platform into Xero or into QuickBooks, or what your chart of accounts should look like, or the key metrics for e-commerce accounting business owners. So we would write an article most weeks and have a newsletter that goes out fortnightly that's all with the goal of providing useful information for e-commerce brands that are in the 7 and 8 figure annual revenue range. So that strategy works well for us. And it's really nice seeing leads come through of people we've never met before, never spoken to. And then in the form that they fill out when they get in touch, we ask how they got in touch with us. And so I would say Google, and then we try and get them to tell us what term they searched. Was it e-commerce accountant or was it something else?
Uh-huh.
And that's really helpful for us to then tweak our content strategy. So that's one. And then the other is partnerships. So we're really embedded in the e-commerce space. So we will go to e-commerce events. We will do sponsorships. We'll do collaborations also with tech tools in the e-commerce space. So we've got a deep relationship with A2X, which is an e-commerce accounting platform. Or it's a tool that helps you aggregate data. And so we use that tool with most of our clients, but also we do partnership collaborations with them at events, webinars, blog posts, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we try and be very specific. We wouldn't pick a random app. It would need to be something that's relevant to our ideal client.
Yeah.
We do other things, but they would be the two top performing strategies for us.
Love it. Okay, so where I was going to go next is because of your international exposure, did you personally have to or get to travel to the UK, US, Australia as you were taking on clients, interacting with clients? Did you have that kind of relationship where you did take advantage of those opportunities to travel, or did you keep these all very remote and distant?
So I love to travel, but in the early days of B Ninjas, there was no money for me. There's no international travel budget for the first few years. I was just trying to hustle to pay myself a salary, and really I was investing mostly back in the business, and I was paying other more expensive team members more than me. So I would have liked to, but I didn't. And so I built those relationships all online, so via Zoom calls and via Slack and email.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been faster if I was able to get to the events more regularly. I did prioritize meeting my business partners face to face. So that was less about clients, but more about trying to build and maintain strong relationships with my business partners.
Yeah.
So I've mentioned Tom, who's my UK business partner.
Yep.
So I actually haven't been to the UK. I've been there previously, but not since I've been running B Ninjas. But he's flown out to Australia a couple of times. And so we've built our relationship that way. And then the same with Wayne, I've in the US. So I came over to QuickBooks Connect last year,
Uh-huh.
and I did one other trip to his hometown in Tucson probably 4 or 5 years ago. And he's also come to Australia twice. But that's more about the business partner relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Then we were able to attract clients through digital marketing strategies. And now Wayne and Tom go to events in the US and UK.
Beautiful. No, this is wonderful. Now, I want to change gears on this. I know that in 2022, you had a life-changing experience. And I bring this up because I'm wondering, you built a business that obviously could work independently of you. And fortunately, you're in a position where as life changed, you could now deal with those circumstances. Would you like to share a little bit of what happened?
Yeah. So in 2022, I was unfortunately diagnosed with DCIS, which is a type of breast cancer. And so that involved me needing to have a mastectomy. And so I was in hospital for 10 days. And there was a whole lead up to that with a lot of different testing and just took a lot of time away where I wasn't able to work. And there was quite a recovery period too. I was lucky that I didn't need to have chemotherapy or radiation, but it took quite a toll physically, but also mentally, just worrying about the diagnosis and what my options were and trying to decide the right course of action. But I feel incredibly grateful that the business was at a point where I could take that time to focus on my health and that I didn't have to worry about letting down clients or letting down the team. Because if that had happened in the first year or two of business, it would have been an absolute nightmare. Those early years of business where we didn't have processes, that things were a bit chaotic, it would have been very difficult. So I got the diagnosis about 5 months after I had already announced that I was stepping down as CEO and I was a part-time advisor. So I did have the space to focus on my health, and I feel very grateful for that.
Well, first of all, I hope your health is better now. How are things with regards to the diagnosis at this point?
Great. So I'm in the all clear, cancer free, and I'm on to annual checkups. I had to have a second surgery in January of this year, and I've been, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, surfing is my passion. And so I've been working with a physio to train me up to be able to surf again. And I took a board out for a paddle just on flat water last week. And I'm planning to have my first surf since August last year, this weekend. So I'm
Oh,
feeling fantastic.
that is wonderful. Well, congratulations. I'm happy to hear the good news, and I'm happy for you. The reason why I bring this up, by the way, is I do feel that as business owners, we oftentimes, it's like being a teenager again. We're invincible. Nothing's going to change. We're just going to be working and we're just going to ride this until who knows when. And whenever I speak to business owners, accounting professionals or of any type, it's oftentimes they work without this end game. And very rare do I run into people that have a very specific exit strategy like you're describing. And in your situation, it was just coincidence that the two kind of came side by side within months of one another. But I do believe that there's so many instances where business owners just presume they're going to continue for the next 3, 5, 10 years. And then all of a sudden something happens, life changes. And when the business is dependent upon the business owner, it can be chaos. But when they've built an organization that is autonomous of them being involved in the day-to-day operations, it's such a relief to know that they can step away and it does not impact the success or the viability of the business. And yet they're now able to still cope with, deal with, address this life situation that they're now having to take care of, whether it's their own health, family members, friends. It's just a litany of lists of items that can come up, that do come up. And you were fortunate in a situation that you'd built a company and it was at a point where you could step away and had already done so, but definitely it didn't impact your business. And I appreciate you sharing that part of the story. Would you have any advice to anyone as they're considering building their business this way and possibly stepping away as you have?
Well, I think lots of accountants like to be heroes. And so instead of building themselves out of the business, they think that as the leader, they need to be the last one in the office and they need to swoop in if there's a problem and fix it. And it is great to lead by example, but I think building a business where you're not so involved and so necessary in all of the steps is actually doing right by your team too. Because if something happens to you and the business falls over, then you've not looked after your team. And if you can create opportunities for growth for them where they can grow into new areas or build new skill sets, then I think you're really looking after your team as well as yourself and creating more options. And I find a business where there's less pressure and some of it can run more like a well oiled machine that doesn't need you in the day to day is actually a nice business to own. And there might be other things that either you can work on to improve that business or to grow it, Or there's more to life than business as well. And that's something I've been thinking about a lot, particularly after my health experience last year, is about what's important and do I want to spend the next 40 years working? Well, yes, I do because I love business, but I don't want to be working 50 or 60 hours a week because I've got other things that are important to me too. And
Yeah.
I'm not willing to sacrifice life now while I'm young and can do adventure activities and delay all of that to when I'm 60 or 70.
Yeah. This is an excellent segue into what you're trying to address in your podcast. It's called Lifestyle Accountant Show. Why lifestyle? I find that very interesting. What is that connection? What is that draw? What is that passion that you bring to this lifestyle that you want to have as an accountant?
I started the podcast because I wanted to have conversations with accountants about, yes, how can you run a great business? But there's lots of content about that. But how can you enjoy your life at the same time? So, how can you have a healthy life, a happy life, and be there for the people that you care about while also running a successful firm? And so, the podcast is more on the personal side. So, the first season was all about remote work and how can you leverage that to build a great life for your team and for yourself and set boundaries and expectations with clients and team members. And then the upcoming season is all about mergers and acquisitions and partnership challenges and issues as accounting firm owners. But everything is through the lens of how can this improve your lifestyle and how can you have a holistic view of life, not just it all being about business growth and spending time looking after your clients, but how can you look after yourself and your family and your team as well?
I love this because one of the things that I have found in all the conversations I've had is many accounting professionals do view their work as nothing more than a means to an end. And they do have hobbies and things that they are passionate about that they pursue, and they don't get all consumed in their business. And it's interesting because they speak of their passions, the hobbies that they have, with as much zeal and energy as they do the businesses that they own and operate. And so I've spoken to people that are accountants by trade, but they're rappers, comedians, they do motorcycling. They just have these extracurricular activities that they're passionate about. And it's always nice to kind of learn that other side of their business. Wouldn't you agree?
It is, absolutely. And I think that makes you more of a well-rounded person. It makes you more efficient too. If you're trying to finish by 3 so you can duck off and go for a surf or go for a mountain bike ride, then it forces you to prioritize ruthlessly about what's important. And I think it also, I find that I do great thinking if I'm surfing or off going for a bushwalk and having time away from the desk. I think that's actually where you get your best ideas and not necessarily when you're in front of the computer hammering out another tax return or another email. So I think it's got the benefit from the personal side of things, but I think it actually makes you better in business too.
Yeah, I have to agree. I find that some of the epiphanies I have aren't sitting at the desk. It's out and about when I'm doing something else and my mind is able to wander. And then that's when that clarity occurs. So I actually can relate to that. My listeners would know I'm a workaholic by trade. I love my work. I do it quite a lot. I am very passionate about it. But likewise, I try to find other interests, whether it be family or personal. And in doing so, I've got these other little things I get to do. I'm looking forward to this weekend. I'm going to be going out side by siding with some friends. That's something I get to look forward to and enjoy. I travel quite a bit, mostly for personal reasons. So I enjoy going on cruises and such. And it's in those things that I find let's say, life having purpose, because it's got to be more than just the work, right?
Absolutely. And I might have some similarities with you in that I actually love my work. So I love running business. I love thinking about it. I'm really enjoying the podcast I'm doing. So sometimes probably early in my career, I was a bit in the workaholic camp, even though I did have other interests, but I really enjoyed what I'm doing. But having those other things to do. And for me, that's surfing and mountain biking and just being in the outdoors and adventures. In fact, right after this podcast, I'm meeting a friend to go mountain biking. I don't generally have meetings on Mondays or Fridays so that I have a bit of space in my schedule to go and do something fun.
Well, thank you for taking the time to do this. I'm enjoying the conversation. I trust my listeners are as well. So I do have a side question just related to the international nature of your business. Were there any nuances in the bookkeeping accounting sphere that you identified as you were working with companies that were in the different countries? And at the same time, did you find that there were just some very common generalities that just really resonated in any of the markets?
That's a good question. And that's something that I was conscious of when we first decided as an Australian bookkeeping business to launch into the US. That was the first market we went into. And so the way I approached it was thinking about, well, what are the risks here? And how can I manage them? And so the first couple of steps were, do we have enough clients? Is there enough demand? And so I waited. I think we had about 7 or 8 clients who wanted to move forward with us. We got professional indemnity insurance to make sure that we were covered to operate in the US. And I also hired a CPA as a contractor. So we had someone with local knowledge in case there were things that I didn't know about.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were very tight around scope. So we didn't offer payroll services. We didn't offer any tax, including no sales tax or local taxes. And we were clear that in the engagement letter that we were offering internal management reports, not anything outside of that. So we managed our risks like that. And then as the team grew and as we hired people with expertise like Wayne, who lives in America and is experienced with how things work over there, we gradually started to offer services. So some of the similarities and differences in Australia, GST, which is like sales tax, is at a transactional level. So every transaction you need to think about, is there GST on this or is there not? Whereas we didn't have to do that. Sales tax is calculated differently. And so I would say it's easier to go from Australian bookkeeping to US than the other direction, because someone who outside of Australia, there's a lot of learning to do around GST. So that would be one example. And then when we started operating in the UK, we already had Tom, who he's the equivalent of a CPA. And quite experienced with UK taxes as well. So he was able to take care of that, which operates more similarly to GST than it does sales tax. So they were considerations, and we were quite slow about when we were operating internationally, what services were we comfortable offering and what did we need to refer to other partners.
That was excellent. That explanation is spot on. And I'd have to agree with you. GST is up in Canada as well. And so there are these little nuances that take place. But all in all, simply because of the global nature of banking and accounting, you'll find that there's tons more similarities, especially when you look at the book of business, than anything else. Debits and credits are still the same, T accounts. And so that familiarity does transfer from country to country. And where many of the countries that you've mentioned were part of the Queensland, you're looking at a lot of similarities just because, you go back 200 years and we were all part of England. And so those things just kind of naturally kind of evolved throughout the economy. One of the things that I wanted to now ask is, as you are in the situation you are now with a thriving business, an international company that's offering these quality services, what would you say to yourself 8, 9, 10 years ago as you were contemplating making that transition from the consulting company into this accounting service that was more recurring revenue and so forth? There were risks, there were challenges, but what advice, what comment would you say to your younger self?
I would say do it. Go and start immediately. And that would be my advice to anyone who's thinking about taking the plunge. I think it's easier to start a business when you're younger. Back then, I didn't have any family responsibility. So I didn't have children. I didn't have a mortgage. I had low cost of living. And I was able to take that risk. And even if the business didn't make money for 6 months, I was fine. And so better to start today than down the track. For those of you that do have more financial responsibilities, I still think that running your own business creates so much freedom and has more upside than if you're working as an employee. And so it may feel more challenging for you if you have more financial commitments, but I think there's still ways to make it happen. So the number one piece of advice for my younger self would be go and do it. And yes, there's tough times. I found it a bit of a roller coaster, the early years, highs and lows. And definitely there was a lot of hard work involved, but it's well worth it. And I'm so grateful that I took the plunge when I did.
That is wonderful advice. And I appreciate how concise it is. It's something I hear from so many people of, I just wish I would have done it sooner and done it more. So that's resonating with me. I appreciate it. So one of the things that I wanted to also ask is, with regards to your advisory service, was that meant to refer to your role in the company, or are you in an advisory capacity with any clients?
I'm in it. So that title is just for my company.
Okay.
And so that means I run, I suppose some people would call them board meetings.
Yeah.
Um, and so I run quarterly board meetings or advisor meetings within our business. And then I also act as a mentor to each of the country leaders
Yeah.
and have regular calls, but also just give feedback on things. So I had a referral partnership agreement come through this morning, and I was giving feedback around what I think the clauses should look like.
Yeah.
Or another leader is working on a new business development strategy. And so I'll give feedback on that. So I don't do any advisory for our e-commerce clients.
Yeah.
But I have recently, so this year, I have been starting to make some investments in the accounting industry. And so by the accounting industry, I mean businesses that are solving problems for accountants. And with some of those, I am taking on an advisor role in that business as well.
Okay.
And so whether that's attending the quarterly board meetings or whether it's a bit more hands-on or giving insight into how accountants operate their firms. And so that's something that I'm only really just getting started with, but I'm looking to do more of that.
Perfect. No, this is just as wonderful. I appreciate all these little insights. The last thing that I wanted to ask is, are you still speaking? Are you going out and doing conferences and the like?
I am. I had to put that on hold last year, but I'm back. So I spoke at the Accounting Business Expo earlier this year, and I'll be speaking at their next event in November. There's a conference called Slipstream, which Slipstream Coaching is run by a friend of mine, and they have a gorgeous conference right near the Great Barrier Reef in Port Douglas.
Yeah.
So I'm traveling there. I'm going to have a little holiday afterwards. That's in August. So I am speaking again, and I really enjoy that. With 2 young kids, I have to be careful of my travel schedule.
Yep.
I try not to be away too much, so I have to just try and pick a couple of events a year, and that's enough. But I think as my kids get older, then I will be able to travel more or bring them along.
Yep. Well, I appreciate your enthusiasm for the speaking, because I have the same thing. I'm actually going to be leaving next week to the UK for a conference, and then I've got 2 others that I'll be attending. And later this year, I've got a few others that I'll be participating in. So conferences, it's part of what I do, and I can definitely relate to what you're sharing there. So this is what I'd like to do now. I'd like to kind of wrap this up. I've got a nice summary that I'd like to do of this and come back to you then for a final thought. But before I break away, I do want to invite our listeners to check out the episode description for information regarding the Lifestyle Accountant Show. It's her podcast where Meryl actually addresses things that I think we all should be considering as we try to have what some people might refer to as a balanced lifestyle. I know a lot of people refer to that. I have a different thought on it, but the point is you can go there and get some information that I'm sure you'll find very helpful and intriguing. And then likewise, she's inviting you to connect with her on LinkedIn. So I have in the episode description her LinkedIn profile that you can definitely take advantage of. And if you haven't LinkedIn or connected with me, do so on LinkedIn as well. And then in addition to all of that, one of the things that I want to provide is we have a variety of resources that we provide to our listeners. In this episode, you can find there a free copy of 2 books that all accounting professionals should have on their bookshelves. It's first and foremost a book called In the Black. It's 9 Principles to Make Your Business Profitable, as well as Red to Black in 30 Days. It's a small business accountant's guide to quick turnarounds to help your clients with the most common challenge that they face, which happens to be cash flow. Now, if you would like, you can also in the episode find the episode description, that is, find additional information, free resources that are available to you as accounting professionals. So definitely take advantage of those by going to the episode description. So as a summary, this conversation has been amazing. First of all, I appreciated the start of her, let's say, lineage in accounting, going back to her grandmother. I think that's quite nice to have that tie to the accounting profession. It's nice to see that she went into BDO, found the entrepreneurial bug that she had in college with the tennis, reverting back to the consulting business, and then ultimately starting Bean Ninjas. The idea of that not just being a bookkeeping business, but literally an international bookkeeping business that she was able to grow, and the relationship she built with Tom and Wayne. different situations, but ultimately pathways for them to have equity in the business and in such have that responsibility to grow the company so that she can, through her processes, eventually step down and take on more of a part-time role, that of advisor and being part of the board. That transition was fascinating because I think it's something that we can all aspire for as one of the exit strategies we can consider as we're running our businesses. And to have a company that is independent and autonomous in that capacity does allow for these life-changing situations, as Meryl experienced in her own life. So I think that was an excellent revelation that we all could have. The other part of this was the marketing discussion. She had some wonderful insights as to the do's and don'ts, the cold marketing not working as much as you'd like, distinguishing in the marketing between short-term, very, very purposeful, driven actions that you can do to ensure that you're getting clients quickly, but also the long game where you're actually doing the podcasting, the blogging and so forth to actually position yourself as that expert giving information so that you can be very influential in your space. We talked about niching. She chose e-commerce, and I really went deep into that. And that was after a number of years working in the business to realize that that's something that they needed to do and specialize in, and how that was beneficial to the company. So a lot of wonderful little insights that we were able to pull from today's conversation. Now, with that, Meryl, what's the final thought that you might have for everyone?
So my final thought is about living life now instead of delaying until tomorrow. And we talked a little bit about my health experience and my thoughts on that. And I think as accounting firm owners, sometimes it can be inconvenient to take time out on a Tuesday morning to go to your son's assembly or baseball game, or to take a Friday afternoon off to go and see your parents. Some of those things can feel inconvenient or not possible. And I would say prioritize those things and make it happen. You'll always find a way to get the work done, and make sure that you're living life now, not delaying for 10 or 20 years. And even if it doesn't feel convenient, make the time to do what's important to you. So I know you asked for one. I'll do two quickly because I wanted to do one thought on life.
Please.
And the other is just around niching. And we've talked about this and my experience going into the e-commerce niche, but for us, that was incredible for the business, making that move, both from a marketing perspective, the quality of our leads as well as the quantity of leads really increased after we made that decision, but also it made operating the business easier because our team weren't learning 15 different apps across all different industries. We had a really clear process of how we work with e-commerce clients. And so if there's one change you could make in your business to make operations more simple and give you the ability to command higher prices as an expert, then I would recommend considering picking an industry niche.
Perfect. I love it. Excellent words of advice. So in ending, let me just kind of wrap a few things up here. First of all, if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do so. It's where here each and every week we have on the experts to literally share with us insights as to how we can have the premier accounting firm in our area, offering quality accounting services and getting paid what we're worth. Now, with that being said, if you haven't binge watched some of our past episodes, I'd encourage you to check those out. We've got some excellent highlights and playlists that you can see on universalaccounting.com. We've compiled some playlists that I'm sure all of you would appreciate based on the specific needs that you have, whether it be marketing, selling, offering quality accounting services, your tech stack, mental health. We've got some playlists there of a variety of conversations that we've had over the years that you can definitely binge into. The other thing I wanted to encourage you to check out is GrowCon. GrowCon happens to be an annual event that we have for accounting professionals. It's for those that own accounting, bookkeeping, and tax businesses. This is a conference that you do not want to miss. It's on the stage that we bring in the experts to help us understand and realize what it is we can be doing to work on our business. At the same time, you get to meet with your peers and learn from those that are literally doing or have done what it is you're aspiring to do in your own business. And lastly, you get to meet the team of Universal Accounting so that you can, in fact, be in business for yourself, but not by yourself. Now, that all being said, I also want to encourage you that if you have any questions about these principles or other things that we talk about on the show, feel free to reach out to us directly. You can contact us by going to universalaccountingschool.com or visiting us online at universalaccounting.com. And of course, you can give us a phone call at 801-265-3777. And always remember this, if it's about accounting, it is universal. Take care, have a great day, and be safe out there, everyone.